So what are some of the poems that came to you in the course of what would eventually be the tradition, where you were like, okay, this is starting to kind of like, these are conversations that are starting to happen between these poems?
I think many of the poems in the last section are poems in direct conversation with a poem like Stand, because that section of the book is quite literally about falling in love. Maybe there's a little bit of falling out of love in there too. And so in a lot of those poems, there was this period, I was talking about this in a conversation yesterday, and this is what Marc is referring to. There's a period between, I would say, Thanksgiving of 2017 and Martin Luther King Day of 2018, and I wrote half the book in that time. And I could not stop writing. I was pulling over my car in order to write stuff down. I would get whole entire poems that I'd be really excited about. You know, you have your poetry friends that you send poems to. And I would send my friend Michael Shoemaker or Michael Dumanis or Malachi Black, I would send them a poem in the morning because I'd been up all night writing it. And then I would send them another poem at 3 o'clock. And then I would send them another poem, you know, at midnight.
Right.
And they would all say, when did you write these poems? And I said, I wrote them and then I sent them to you. Like, you're lying, Jerry. And I remember Michael Shoemaker would be like, you have got to be. I mean, he would get poem after poem. He's like, what is going on? And at some point, I really did think I was going to die. Because the only thing I've ever really, I mean, maybe there are other things that I can do, but the only thing that I could really put my finger on that was like a productive thing that I could do well was write a poem. And because I was getting all of these, really, when I say getting,
Receiving.
yeah, it was really strange and scary. Getting all of these poems at once, I was like, oh my God, I guess when this stops, I'm gonna die because I will have written all the poems I was meant to write.
Right.
So I was like talking to my sister about my will. It was weird. It was just a strange time. And there's a way that the poems that I had written before that began to take shape and could be more easily revised because of the poems I was writing during that period.
Oh, right.
Some of those poems, a poem like Hero, for instance, and For a Day in the Morning, two poems in which my mother, or the speaker's mother, appears. I was
we'll get to that.
I was particularly proud of those poems because, you know, I had spent my first 2 books, I have 3 books of poetry. The first 2, I really let my dad have it. And I finally wrote this book in which my mom got hers too, you know? And so, and so when but you know, I wrote those poems in that first half after I finished the New Testament. I was very slowly writing poems. And I literally printed every line that I had written that was more than 11 syllables long. And I called that a long line. Right. And I took every line that I had written that was a long line, and any line that mentioned my mom, I cut out on a sliver of paper. And I took all the lines that mentioned my mom and I arranged them associatively until I ended up with this poem that ended up being called For a Day in the Morning. And that poem, and then the other, I mean, you're asking about like what they have to do with each other and how thematic, you know, concern is built. That poem sort of stood there and I was like, oh, well, that's pretty good. Let's see what I can do with this. Like, what happens if I send it to Michael Dumanis? Is he gonna tell me it's not a poem, which happens. And then I had these lines left over so I could make them into the poem that turned out to be Hero. That's how those 2 poems were made. And often, I mean, the duplexes were made in this way. So often thematic concern is built because of the way I write poems when I'm not receiving them. There's a way that I write poems which has to do with the pastiche, with juxtaposition, with imagining that if I wrote a line, that I'm a poet and therefore that ought to be in a poem. There's this one sentence in For a Day in the Morning, and I think it is the sentence I'm proudest of ever having written, because it made it into a poem and I thought it never would. And the sentence is, it's a part of a longer line, but the sentence is, I love my mother. And it's the very kind of thing that would get cut out of a poem in workshop. Sure. But I kept up with it. I mean, obviously I love, who doesn't love their mother? Right? Well, child. I got a list. So like having a sentence like that and holding on to it for years, really, holding on to it and thinking, maybe there's a reason why that doesn't get cut out.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then coming upon the poem that creates that reason for it to stay.
That opens up space for
and
it.
I just believe that about poetry, that you know, we write something and we get frustrated. Our students often, the other thing I should have mentioned is I met some of the undergrads here who were absolutely brilliant, and I appreciate it. I had lunch with them, and thank y'all so much. Anyway, so, but I very, you know, when you write a poem and the poem fails, that's great, because every poem has at least one good line in it. And that means that that line is waiting for you, it seems to me, to have the experiences necessary to write the other lines. This is why you need to like fall in love and get your heart broken and ride roller coasters and travel to Bali. Do you understand what I mean? Because then suddenly you have other lines that meet that line.
Right.
And that's, for me, how thematic concern is built.